Welcome everybody to this LeadDev webinar called Investing in Your Personal Development as an Engineering Leader. It's a LeadDev webinar, as I mentioned, in partnership with Skillawhale. We're coming together today as a sort of preview of what's going to happen with LeadDev London on June 7th and 8th. I'll be the host in London, but also the host of the panel today. And I'm delighted to have all of our awesome panelists here who are also going to be speakers at LeadDev London. So if you'd like to join us, head over to the LeadDev website to get a ticket if you haven't already. As a special thanks for participating in our community and coming along today, we've got a offer for our webinar audience, the opportunity to invest in yourselves by attending LeadDev London. If you use the code INVESTINGINME in all caps at the checkout, you'll save 15% on our standard conference tickets. But back to today, we've got a panel today that lasts about 45 minutes. Both myself and the panelists will head over to the LeadDev Slack afterwards in the personal development channel to answer any additional questions that we don't get to. But we might have time during the panel today to do some Q&A. So please use the Q&A functionality in Zoom to ask any questions that you've got, and we'll make some time for those at the end. But let's get started with some intros. My name is Mary Williams. I'm an experienced CTO. I'm also have the honor of being the chair of LeadDev for the last 7 years, and I'll be joined by a number of wonderful panelists today, and I'm going to just quickly go around and have them introduce themselves. Jasmine, if we could start with you, please. Would you like to intro yourself to the group, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary, for having me. So my name is Jasmine James, and I lead teams at Twitter that contribute to improving the experience of internal developers by providing capabilities and driving processes for local development environments, information findability and discoverability, migration acceleration, centralized tool support, everything that an engineer deals with, but trying to make it a better experience for them. And I'm excited to be here as a part of this panel because throughout my career and during my transition from an individual contributor to an engineering leader, there was quite a few non-traditional methods that I came across to help me grow as a leader. So I'm excited to share those with you all today and also hear from Vitor and the other panelists about how they have grown individually. So thank you again for having me.
Awesome, and thank you so much. I know you're joining us from Valencia, Spain today because you're co-hosting another conference. So appreciate you making time for us from backstage of a different conference to spend time. I'll hand over next to Vitor to introduce himself.
Hi, folks. Pleasure to be here today. My name is Vitor. I'm Director of Engineering at Delivery Hero. So this is a global company that's doing food delivery type of business. And there I have the pleasure to lead the driver app development. So being with the company for some time and being rising through the ranks and supporting since when we were one small team doing logistics. Through now, I have a team of around 70 colleagues that are together with me doing this. So as Jasmine said, throughout this journey, there were so many learnings, so many moments that, oh my God, I wish I could have this insight or here and there, right? And I've been collecting this through the last couple of years, and also hopefully today I can share a bit of this, right? So again, it's going to be my first time speaking at LeadDev. I'm super excited about this, and also I feel also pressure to have a high bar, being in a panel with such caliber of people, right? So thanks for having me.
That's lovely of you to say, Vitor. Thank you. And last but by no means least, Howell, please intro yourself, and of course Skillawhale, one of our sponsors.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Howell Carver. I've been a CTO for over a decade in startup and scale up companies. And I have a very strong lifelong interest in personal development and learning. That's why I'm particularly excited about the topic for this panel. I self-taught C at the age of 9. I taught myself a year of my degree. I realized that self-teaching has carried on forever. I'm surrounded on this desk by bits of electronics after I started trying to teach myself how to build an 8-bit computer, which at some point I will finish. And I think all of that led me to start this company focused on training and technology, which is what Skillawhale is. And I'm thrilled to be part of the LeadDev community, honestly, and for Skillawhale to be the headline sponsor of LeadDev in London. I was an attendee myself in the past, and I just think that the quality of the content at LeadDev is outstanding, as is the community, which I think is really impressive and inclusive. So yeah, really happy to be here.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. So one of the biggest challenges we face as managers and leaders in tech is that many of the skills that we learned as great individual contributors, they're not necessarily relevant for management and leadership, right? The path of going through a career as an engineer doesn't necessarily teach you the skills that you need to then become a more senior leader and a manager. I talk a lot about how really management's more of a career change than it is a promotion. We're starting over as novices a lot of the time because those skills are not necessary in our earlier career. But also, it's a point where you suddenly become the busiest you have ever been. Your life is all about meetings. Your schedule looks like a Tetris game gone wrong. And so it can be really difficult to find time in that busyness for personal development. And so our panel today, we're going to explore that dichotomy, and we'll talk both strategies and tactics to make room for personal development as engineering leaders. And so I'm going to start with a question that's a bit more kind of, how do you even think about this problem, I suppose, which is, how do you think about the different categories or types of personal development that you want to make room for? Hal, do you want to kick us off here? And Jasmine and Vitor, if you've got anything to add, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think there are two axes here. I think there's the part of leadership or management that it relates to, which for me normally comes from a problem-driven kind of desire to be better at solving something. So often I'll discover I'm bad at something, or I'll get feedback that makes me realize I'm bad at something, or I'll see someone else in the company who is really good at something, and I'll think I want to be like that and to improve. And so there's the kind of the domain-driven side. I think the other axis I would consider is the kind of learning that it is. So I have this model for learning that breaks down things into knowledge, skills, and wisdom. And I approach each of those very, very differently. So for me, knowledge is about facts and data and something you can write down as a kind of a data point and then give to someone else, and they know it as well as you do. That's knowledge. Skills are like ability. Anything with a verb in it is probably a skill, like writing code would be an example of a skill, albeit quite a broad category of skill. And then wisdom is about contextual judgment. It's about making the right decision in given circumstances. And I think we need all of these things. So skills often build on knowledge, right? To drive a car, you need to know what each of the pedals do. And wisdom is really about applying a skill well in context. So knowing to press the brake when you come up to that junction, for example, is an important part of being a wise and sensible and hopefully safe driver. And so I would start by thinking like that. What kind of domains do I need to be developing in? Where do I need to be learning? And then for me, the approach for learning comes back to what sort of thing it is. And if it's knowledge, then you can get there through sort of spaced repetition, exposure, and self-testing to things. So for example, if there's a given framework that you want to kind of internalize, like, I don't know, the one that springs to mind randomly is this book, The Coaching Habit, which suggests a series of questions to ask throughout your the people that you're coaching, and sort of gives you that almost a formula that you can reuse, which for me is about knowledge. So if I wanted to memorize and internalize that, then I'd use a spaced repetition approach. Skills, I think you have to try the thing, fail, and get feedback. And so with skills, I would look for kind of that constant feedback and be finding ways to build it into my everyday management and leadership experience. And then wisdom, I think, has to come from reflection. Wisdom comes from having applied a skill and had it go well or poorly. And those also don't have to be your own applications. So one of the joys of wisdom is you can get it by discussion with other people. And it's one thing I'm definitely expecting to gain excuse me, from the panel today is that wisdom from other people's experiences, and realizing that thing that works really well for me doesn't work so well for other people because of the context, and that thing that works well for other people would work well for me in this context. And that I think is how we gain wisdom, by doing things and then appreciating the reason why something worked or didn't, to then inform how we make decisions in the future.
I love that model. And I suppose the only thing I'd add is I think that there's also, it's worth remembering that we don't always just need to work on the things that we're bad at, but the things that we're good at. So maintaining a skill or continuing to add to your wisdom or to your knowledge is something that you have to work on. I remember if you go back 20 years, almost all management was just focused on gaps. It was what people weren't good at. And we missed the opportunity to help someone go from good to great, or great to excellent to world class. And so it's sometimes also worth remembering that, sometimes you got to build on what you already have and really invest in becoming even better at something that you are good at, because then you can be the example of excellence to someone else, like you alluded to earlier. Jasmine or Vitor, anything to add on this kind of ways of thinking about the categories of personal development before we move on?
Yeah, definitely. I think I really like that Harwell started with the discussion about skill, knowledge, wisdom. I mean, this brought me this anecdote that a friend once told me that, for example, knowing that tomato is a fruit, it's a knowledge, right? But not putting it on your fruit salad is wisdom. So this really stuck with me, and it's interesting because you open the discussion right on the spot, right, about the self-awareness and self-reflection, right? I think this is one of the most important skills a leader should focus, because usually it gives you the roof, right, how high you can go, right? I used to tell people, right, so it's a very important skill to know if you are average at something, if you're excellent, if you are below average, because once you have this understanding, you can A, understand what are your next steps, but B, also, if you're not having success in a certain skill or in a certain behavior, but you know that you are doing rather a good work, you just know that you should just persevere a little further, and you should not give up, right? Because the turning point might be coming quite soon.
Kathy Sierra once famously wrote that one of the most important things that we fail to teach about coding is that it's difficult. And that actually, as soon as you tell people some of this is hard, but if you persevere, if you keep doing it, you'll get it. With maths, with physics, with coding, that they're all particular domains, but that's super important. And actually, one of the worst things that's happened, I think, in our industry is this belief that you have to be a natural, you have to find it easy, because actually there's nothing stopping you becoming amazing as a coder if you stick at it. But if you think that the fact that you don't immediately understand how matrices operations work, or exactly how this DevOps concept applies to you or whatever, if you think that you have to be a natural, you have to get it immediately, then you're kind of dooming yourself to struggling. Where if you know it's meant to be hard and you know that perseverance will pay off, then that immediately levels up your ability to do really well. I'm going to go to Jasmine.
I think sometimes we created these expectations, right, that we have to be immediately good at something. I would rather say learning something, it's much more about doing as many mistakes as fast as you can, right? The more you make those mistakes, the more you're going to accelerate your learning, right? So sorry. Yeah.
No, makes sense. Jasmine, go ahead. If you had something.
Well, it's crazy that Victoria just mentioned that. I was just going to mention failing fast is very, very pivotal and key in growth, in my opinion, and understanding that you might fail and going into it and think with the mindset of what can I learn from this, and approaching it that way has been very, very, very significant for me in my career. And Mary, what you mentioned about the continuous improvement, right? When you're good at things and focusing on those things you're good at, as well as balancing with some of those things where you have identified gaps, I think is very key to maintain a positive mindset when it comes to growth, right? Because a lot of times we see growth as just, negative things, as, maybe feedback you've gotten or things that you realize as you, introspected, but definitely good to keep a healthy balance, I think. Hywell has his hand up.
Hywell, go ahead.
Sorry to steal the spotlight again. I mean, I love the point about accelerating feedback. So I think that's so true, particularly with skills and wisdom, right? Getting that feedback. We're so used to talking about cycle time for our products, right? The idea that we can put something out there, measure how it's doing, learn from that, and then kind of go around the loop again. But when you consider that about learning, we often are very happy to let learning sort of sit on the back burner and just sort of creep up on us almost. And if you allow for that, your cycle time in learning might be 6 months, maybe even a year. Whereas if you really try and focus and say, I'm going to get feedback on this thing, I'm going to improve this skill, then you can potentially get that cycle time down to days, maybe hours. And what that means for accelerating your learning is amazing. And I'm sorry, I really love that you brought up that thing about tomatoes, Vitor, because when I was preparing my talk for LeadDev London, I thought I would just put into GPT-3 the OpenAI generation thing. I thought I'd put in, write me a short speech on knowledge, skills, and wisdom and see what happened. And it came back with that exact quote, except it didn't tell me who wrote it, so I might need to follow up with you and your friend and find out where it really comes from.
Nice. Vitor, you had something to add?
Yes, I think like it was about what Jasmine said, like about, that when we have a failure or when we come across a mistake, right, it's not necessarily something bad. Actually, we can always have like a perspective, okay, instead of, hey, I failed here, it's actually, hey, people, everyone, look what I just learned from this, right? And then I think as a leader, this starts to go also in a dimension that the way that we deal with failures, it's also like how we are role modeling the culture in our environments, right? So I think it's completely different than when you as a lead in whatever context you are, you always have this positive perspective or this, let's say, growth mindset of learning. Okay, when we fail, we're actually learning, right?
Yeah, one of my favorite concepts in this area of learning new skills is deliberate practice. And so there's this definition of deliberate practice that's a very specific type of practice. It's practice where you're willing to exert effort. You want to get better at whatever the thing is. You're finding it challenging, but not so challenging that it's demotivating, just challenging enough to be interesting. But you're also repeating things enough that you can learn from them. And then the final part of that is that you have immediate informative feedback. And so one thing I want to remind people, like obviously we're here today talking about our own personal development, but one of the really amazing things you can do for your direct reports as a manager is to help them introspect, to help them take a moment, think about what they've learned, think about how that meeting went, give them some immediate informative feedback so that their cycle time on improvement can be faster. Because like you say, we get addicted often as software engineers to that kind of tests fail, we build the code, tests pass, that kind of like dopamine hit of feeling like we've achieved something is really great. But as soon as you get into things that take longer to get better at, things like developing what are called soft skills, but bluntly are quite a lot harder for most of us. You need this sort of model of deliberate practice, and you need immediate informative feedback, even if that is just helping someone self-reflect. It's really important. But I'm going to move us on. So my next question is, we've got all these great thoughts about as you say, knowledge, skills, and wisdom. But time is its own vector and its own problem here, right? So do you have particular strategies or tactics for making sure that you have time for learning? Jasmine, I'm going to start with you here.
Yeah, I think that, just in transparency, making time for like yourself, especially as a leader who wants to see, your team grow and everyone be successful is very difficult, because a lot of times as leaders, we put our team, before ourselves. We want to see them execute well and empower them to do that. But I definitely think that some ways that I make time for learning is being very intentional about setting goals within and alongside the work, right? So as we're planning for execution on roadmap and objectives for the company, also building in some objectives for yourself. And this is something that I do for my team as well. Like we explicitly talk about what are the personal development goals that we want to accomplish. And by doing that on a quarterly basis, I don't really feel like the cadence matters as long as you do it. We talk about it in one-on-ones. I talk about it with my manager in one-on-ones. What am I doing to work towards achieving that goal? What's preventing me from getting there? Maybe there's something that needs to be, deprioritized, or something, to reprioritize that growth. But that's something that I do. Another thing that I found very, very effective, especially now being a manager of managers, is delegation and empowering my team to execute versus doing everything yourself, creating that time. And it also allows them a chance to grow too, right? You just talked about, challenging your team for the next level of leadership, and then giving them that feedback real time so that they can course correct. So I feel like delegation provides a platform for that too. So just a few things that I do. There's still usually not enough time, but I do use the time that I create to work towards those personal growth goals. So it's really, really good.
For anybody who struggles with delegation, and I'll freely admit that I have always struggled with delegation, I want to have something perfectly, beautifully shaped and packaged up before I delegate it. And one of the most impactful things Laura Hogan ever wrote was a worksheet for messy delegation. And she convinced me that actually delegating when you haven't figured out exactly how the work could be done or how that problem could be solved, that's often the best learning opportunity for somebody else. And if you haven't seen her messy delegation worksheet, it's worth having a look at. Give yourself some freedom to delegate some things that are a little bit amorphous or maybe a little less well articulated, because actually sometimes there can be a lot of learning for people in just figuring out the problem as well as figuring out the solution. Vitor and Hal, any strategies or tactics for making time and keeping time for personal development?
Yes, and so I'm a big believer in calendar blocks. Just putting time in your calendar, because people respect calendars as a rule. When people want to schedule a meeting with you, if you have something in your calendar that says important time to be kept free, and if you are going to use that time for learning and for your personal development, then I think that will happen. And it's a small life hack, but it really works. And it's just important that you kind of hold yourself to that and make sure you don't let other work creep into that time. And I think you can do something similar to enable that for your reports as well. A friend of mine, another engineering leader, Laura Taco, tweeted the other day something along the lines of making sure filling your engineer schedules is a good way of making sure that no work will get done on time. Because if you remove all the slack from a process, there's now no buffer for anything to go wrong. None of the kind of soft stuff that needs to happen around the actual execution of work will happen. And I think the same is true with learning. And learning, I think, is part of that soft stuff that's critical to happen around work. And if you just fill people's time with productivity, what feels like productive work, actually you lose all of those benefits that come from learning, because they simply won't have space for it.
Yeah. So make time for slack. Make there be some space.
Right.
I think you were right on the spot when you said about leveraging calendars and saving time for it. I usually tell people that, your priorities are where your time is being spent, right? So if you say that learning is a priority, but you're not spending hours in learning, then learning is not really a priority, right? And I think a good tip here that I use is I try to plan my week in advance, right? So either Friday end of the day or Monday beginning of the day, I plan my whole week, right? And I really try to be strict about these learning times. Also in the same direction that Jasmine mentioned, right? So using goals. And actually, the fact of maybe you making your goal public could be a great way to incentivize you to achieving it, right? Because you can ask your team, your manager, your peers to keep you accountable for that goal, right? So help me to be more accountable for this, and that's why I'm gonna make these goals public, right? So I think this usually works quite well in my experience.
If I get, sorry, Jasmine, you put your hand up first. You go.
Just on the subject of time management, I think that definitely blocking calendars is amazing. I think there's a lot of opportunities outside of the scope of work day that you can also leverage to do support your learning journey. I don't know how many of us are commuting right now. I know most people work from home, but one thing that I did prior to the pandemic was listen to the audiobooks on my commute to work, which was very, very, very useful. Even as I answer emails or doing other mundane activities like expense reports, listening to an audiobook or things like that, in parallel also work well for me. Just thought I'd mention that. I find it very, very good use of time.
Yeah. So let's go on to talking about a little bit more about on-the-job learning. We know that majority of learning does happen when we're actually practicing the skill or using the knowledge. It really solidifies. It's not what you said about repetition and spaced repetition is obviously very important, but putting it into practice seems to be when we really most solidify our learnings, or when we're teaching other people. Any tactics to share on how to make the on-the-job learning as effective as possible? I'm going to start with Hal and then go to Vitor.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference between knowledge and skill, that knowledge you can learn passively and you can learn through spaced repetition. but that isn't how you learn skills. Skills are learned by doing and feedback. And generally, I think, especially in software development, knowledge has become extremely cheap. You can normally Google something or look it up on Confluence or whatever. Knowledge is effectively a local cache in your head of the things that you could reach via Google. The thing we care more about is skills, being able to translate this problem into code or being able to solve that kind of problem. I think that self-learning is really valuable, and I've certainly done a lot of it myself. The problem is it's really slow. There's been a big trend in learning in the flow of work. The idea that we shouldn't have to go away from the place where we're working, or potentially even leave our laptops in order to learn, which can be on demand. It can be access to videos and resources, although obviously that's still passive learning, so it doesn't get you much beyond knowledge. And it can be some kind of very, very targeted feedback with an expert. And I'm straying close to the sort of skill or whale model of learning here, so I'm not going to describe it in too much detail. But I think if you're trying to learn a skill, essentially what you need is human feedback that's focused on that skill. So pair programming is a way of achieving this that's directed by the task that you're working on. There are other ways of sort of doing a more top-down, granular, across the scope of a kind of a topic way of identifying which areas you need to learn and having that kind of feedback built in. And if what you're trying to learn is wisdom, then I think it's critical to find time to reflect, ideally with peers. So if you can find ways of having a circle of people who are solving the same kind of problems, hopefully in different ways to you, and then you can really explore why you solved that problem that way, why that team works in Kanban and you work in Scrum, why this team chose to run on EC2 and this team runs on Kubernetes. Like, those discussions are how you gain that wisdom and see when each decision is the right one.
Yeah. Vitor, what about you? Any strategies or tactics for making on-the-job learning as superpowered as possible?
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan, as I said before, of making your goals public, or at least, spread the word of, oh, hey, people, I'm really excited about learning this month. And, if you come across any opportunity or anything, just ping me out, maybe we can bounce some ideas. I mean, I can give as an example, last year I was focusing in practicing coaching and mentoring. And I was just saying to my team, hey guys, I just did a workshop on this topic. I would really like to practice more. And again, if anybody would like to be my guinea pig and practice with me, I will happy take it. And if you are genuine to people, maybe you're lucky enough to have somebody in your circle that would also support or pair up with you. And this is something that has worked. I think also trying to find a mentor, right? It's a great opportunity. I mean, at all times, I'm always mentoring someone in one skill and being mentored in a completely different set, right? And it's the same direction, right? So I can give also a recent example, there was a new joiner in my organization, and such a skilled person. I was so impressed by the contribution of this person. I really approached him and say, hey, I observed your behaviors here and there. And I mean, I was really impressed how productive you were. I was wondering if you would be willing to meet with me once a month and you could coach me on this topic, right? I'm also trying to improve there. And I think if you're genuine and the people have the capacity, my experience is that people are more on the side of, yes, let me help you, right? And yeah, I was able to accelerate a lot my skill learning in some categories by doing this.
Yeah, one of the add-ons to the kind of model of deliberate practice that I mentioned earlier is that there's 3 different modes of deliberate practice. One of them is called the chess model, which is exactly what you described, where you notice someone who is the equivalent of a grandmaster in chess, where people actually study famous games, right? They look at the board, they think what would they do, then they look at what the grandmaster did in that situation and they consider why. So they do the reflection of why would their move have been different? Why is this the presumably superior move? And a lot of times that's what we get when we're shadowing someone or we're observing someone who's, whether it's a really better presenter or architect or coder than we are. You're learning by this kind of chess model of observing someone who's a real expert and then trying to emulate them. The other 2 models of deliberate practice are the sports model, which is working on the muscles that you need for the activity. So you don't do push-ups because you're going to do push-ups during the rugby game, but because it makes you stronger for during the rugby game when you need to, to take that tackle or do well in the Scrum. And then there's the music model, which is breaking things up and practicing a little part at a time and then stringing them together over time. So things like coding katas are like the music model, where you're practicing to make your like automatic motion better. So when people do testing katas, for instance, where they, try to get into the habit of testing the positive, the negative, and the weird. That's a great example of the music model as well. And you can apply all of these in your day-to-day work. If I move us on to our next question, keeping current is a really hot topic among senior leaders in particular, because I think the more senior you become as a manager in particular, the further away you feel often from the day-to-day coding. How do you keep up with our ever-changing industry? If I start with Jasmine and then I'll go to Vitor.
Yeah, absolutely. So keeping up is definitely key. I think when you're in a position, especially of a transformational role within an organization, maybe you're looking to change things. And oftentimes I think there's no way that we're the only company doing this, right? So who can I find that I can, look at? And like you said, the chess model, who is the grandmaster in this thing I want to do? And how can I connect with them so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel? So keeping abreast of current changes is definitely key. I think the great thing about living in this day and age is that there's so many ways to connect. And I think that the pandemic has even made it easier and people are more readily to share, like online versus in person. There's so many events that we can leverage for that, LeadDev being a great one. So various communities out there. For example, I'm a big part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, just from my prior experience as a system engineer and contributing to their projects. And right now I'm at the conference and connecting with people. So staying in touch with those communities that solve some of the problems that you're tasked to solve in your role, and making connections with those people very frequently, because those people I've connected with like 4 or 5 years ago are in different roles, solving different problems. And if there's something that I'm facing, I have that network of people to leverage and reach out to and help me solve those problems. So I think that participating in communities is a big thing. And also resources, right? There's newsletters, there's Google groups, there's Slack groups that we can all be a part of that people are asking questions. LeadDev provides a great community for personal development that we're going to be in later today. So connecting there and just keeping in touch with folks is a great way to, stay abreast of updates.
Yeah. Vitor, what about you? How do you make sure you keep current, that you still feel, maybe particularly on the technical side, that you still feel that you know enough, that you know what the latest things are?
Yeah, no, it's indeed a big challenge, right? And the more time you spend on the management function, right, the more you see you becoming less sharp on the technical part. I think like Jasmine already mentioned a great idea, which is the leveraging audiobooks, right? So all the time when I'm doing my house chores, I'm always listening in an audiobook and trying to maximize the gains for this or other boring task. Think events like LeadDev, right? I think the great thing about conferences like this is you have this curated content, high quality, right? That you can just consume in a very structured format and just accelerate your learning, right? So I think I always try to at least once a year or a couple of times a year to keep track of these big conferences and so on. And I mean, throughout our career, right, we are going always creating some kind of, let's say, feed of trusted writers, right? Authors that are publishing on their blog or in their LinkedIn profile and so on. And I think in my case, people like Gergely Oros or also Alex Shu, there's a couple of folks that are there sharing a lot of knowledge. And I think it's great way just to benchmark these people that are in companies that they already solved certain problems, that they are kind of an industry reference. Usually these people are very keen also in sharing their learnings. And again, as Jasmine say, really trying to, avoid reinventing the wheel. Every time I come across a problem, I always ask myself, it's not possible that I am the first person in the world solving this problem. And if it is, I'm happy. But most of the time, actually, you can just do a quick research and find already quite some structured content around it.
Yeah, I myself, I get a huge amount of additional value from helping to curate LeadDev, just from seeing all the hundreds of talk proposals that we get, it really tells me what people are worrying about and what people are focused on. So it's a very reciprocal process that I'm trying to curate the best content for the conference, but I'm also learning what people are worried about and what people are focused on just from what they're proposing as well. So it's a very kind of circular process in the end. Hal, anything to add on like keeping current and how you, I mean, 8-bit CPU is a weird thing to be focused on right now. So I'm interested in how much you're led by wanting to keep current versus like your personal interest, or is there a reason that you think CPU development is going to become a central topic in the near future?
But no, not for me at least. I mean, I'm sure it might be if I worked at Intel or something. That was definitely a sort of personal spare time thing, because I realized I didn't fully understand the path between me writing something in code and, you know, bit colors changing on the screen. And so I thought, well, I wanted to close that gap for myself, and to really grok it from a fundamental point of view. But as for the question that you asked, I don't really have much to add. I think Peter and Jasmine covered the sort of sources that we should be thinking about really thoroughly. I'm a big fan of inbound information rather than stuff that I have to go and pull. So I like in my news aggregator app, I get a feed of the 10 top voted articles on Hacker News daily, and then you know, the variety of email lists and communities that I'm part of, where I'm always trying to not kind of spot trends, but you just sort of absorb and notice things over time. But this is the thing about knowledge: you can sort of imbibe it passively. It's just being surrounded by it. It sort of comes into you by osmosis, and then you start thinking, oh, everyone's really talking a lot about generics and Go at the moment. I wonder what the real story is there. And where I think the real value in the kind of human connection is understanding the why. So there's this thing about wisdom, that we translate wisdom back into knowledge. People who have wisdom write books that try and condense that into knowledge, or they come up with frameworks, or they kind of rules of thumb and best practices, which are really useful for us all then to copy. But what we lose from that is the context. And it's actually very hard to bring that context into the decision making. I could say, here's a great way to organize your dev team, but if I don't basically include a flow chart about the other ways you could have been managed your dev team, and the reason that the sort of circumstances where this is the right one, then you might be using it in a really inappropriate context. And so that's when I think the discussions with humans are really helpful, because you can then go and say, oh, you adopted, I know you moved your whole stack onto Haskell, like, tell me about that. Why did that make sense to you? Oh, you've all like rewritten everything in C++. Tell me about the thinking there. That's super interesting. And then that is how I think I at least get better at making decisions for the contexts I'm working in.
Got it. I'm going to go to the Q&A, the questions that we've got from the audience. One here's a great question about if anyone's got advice on context switching. So going from one topic to the other, where blocking diaries doesn't work. So for example, going from BAU work to high priority service tickets or P1 issues. Does anyone have any specific tactics or strategies they use to context switch effectively? I'll start here. I am a massive fan of note-taking and note-making because it enables my brain to free up. I've been a CTO for a long time. I have been in a world where my life is 8 hours of meetings a day, easily 8 hours of meetings a day for a long time. And I realized that if I couldn't switch my brain fully from this topic to the next topic to the next topic, I wasn't going to be very effective. And so I really focused at a certain point in my career on making super effective notes, so I can trust that the minute that session ends, my notes are good enough that I can go back to them and I can just wipe my slate clean and go to the next topic, rather than having to try keep the end of that context. The other trick that I know is super useful here is to leave a sentence unfinished, or to leave a feature half implemented, because it's a lot easier to pick back up work that you're halfway through, strangely, than it is to start over with a new task that might feel more challenging. Any other advice on context switching from any of you three?
I loved all those points, Mary. I feel like the metaphor is that you're taking your mental call stack and finding really efficient ways to page it out to memory so that later on you can sort of read it back in and resume execution, which makes a lot of sense to me. I think as well as that, keeping the units as small as possible, because that means the context is smaller. And I had, in the last 4 years, I've had 2 children, which means that now like there is no time. And so one of the skills I've had to learn is just context switching immediately and dropping everything and coming back. And part of that for me has been about keeping units really, really small. So like knowledge learning, I have this app on my phone that I can like use while I'm waiting for the kettle to boil while I make a cup of tea. And that is like time that I can then dedicate to learning and sort of keeping up with where I want to be. With skills, I have like ways of reminding myself with like to-do apps and daily things I want to be working on and improving, and scheduling kind of feedback sessions. It's in the way that Skill Aware works as well, and that all of our learning is in 60-minute chunks. Ultimately, there is going to have to be some smallest unit of time, and I think the answer is really to make context switching as painless as possible by making units small, but you can't avoid it altogether.
Yeah, thanks, Hal. Vitor?
I would like to add also a different perspective to this question, because I think a couple of things, right? I always reflect on the process effectiveness aspect of this, right? Because I think also like processes can be there to help, right? Perhaps you have like a firefighter that is doing a rotation, and then like can rotate this responsibility, so not the whole team or not the same person is always being the subject of this interruption or this, right? And another dimension to this, I always, try to self-reflect, and something that I also plan to discuss a little bit in my talk at LeadDev is, the difference of, a team that's performing in a healthy way versus a team that's a little bit unhealthy. And I like to say the healthy team, it's like, it's a quiet place. There's no crisis. People is not running around because they already anticipated the crisis and like incorporated them as part of their roadmap or their day-to-day. Usually when I see a team that has this characteristic that they are always on this firefighting, there's always something happening, they are unable to do a weekly plan or a daily plan and stick to that. Usually that's a smell that that team's not in such a healthy position in terms of, am I anticipating all the things that can come, right? So then I bring all this reflection, okay, how can we anticipate more these things? So when we plan our day, we plan our thing, we can plan already in a way that, we are not interrupted by P1 issues or, production server goes down and everybody goes crazy.
Yeah, so basically if context switching is super painful, think about whether there's a process or structural change you can make to reduce the burden of that on everybody rather than just get better at it individually. It's a great point. Sorry, Jasmine, I'll go to you and then I will wrap this up. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to mention, just based on what Vitor mentioned about, trying to solve for the root cause of the context switching, I think very intentional planning. I think I'm very fortunate in the front that my teams work together very frequently. So sometimes what we do to reduce the context switching is plan together. And then you have a diverse set of perspectives of things that your team may not have knowledge of that could be lurking and be disruptions waiting to happen. So that way there's visibility across the board. You make your plans public so that everyone can weigh in on the possible disruptions that can happen down the line. And that helps set the stage, right, for success and like seamless execution. So that's one practice that we do internally.
Awesome. Love it. So I'm going to bring us to a close here. Just another reminder that we have LeadDev on the 7th and 8th of June. For those of you who are more senior managers, for managers of managers, we also have a new offering which is called Leading Eng, which is more it's like a workshop conference hybrid where you'll get to learn from a load of other similar leaders as well. So that's worth looking into if you haven't already. And I'm going to close out by letting each of our panelists here give us a very quick teaser of what they're going to be talking about in their LeadDev talk that's coming up at the beginning of June. Jasmine, I'll start with you, then Vitor, then Hal.
Yeah. Thank you. So it's very interesting how I will mention like creating a framework, best practices, rules of thumbs. So I'm going to be talking about how to develop or leverage a framework for a differentiated customer experience. In my career, I've historically served internal teams, but I do think customer experience, a customer is a customer. So I'm going to talk through what are some of those best practices that you can use to determine what could be your differentiated customer experience and how you can then work to implement that and improve that on a continuous basis. So excited to chat about it.
Fantastic. Vitor, what about you? Tell us about your talk.
Cool. From my talk, I was lucky enough to be in an environment that experienced hypergrowth in the last couple of years. So my talk is going to be also a lot about this, right? How do you move into a management position, like maybe a smaller scope, then you go to a larger scope, then suddenly you're managing managers and you have multiple teams, and suddenly you're doing budget and it's completely different for your previous engineering expertise that actually enable you to take this path in the first place, right? So I think like a lot of reflections of my personal career and also from my peers and the people that I meet and talk about these challenges.
Sorry, somebody had to speak whilst I'm muted. Obviously had to be me. Hal, how about you? What are you going to be telling us about at LeadDev?
I'm going to be talking about how you can learn to be wise, how you can take people's best practices and work out when they will work for you and when they won't, and how to understand their context. Because fundamentally, success isn't always repeatable, and we can only succeed by understanding why someone else's success happened.
Magic. So like a meta level, how do you even pick which things are worth trying for your own team? I love that. I love that.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you all very, very much. Really appreciate your time and your insight today, panelists, and thank you for the audience for being here. And I'll look forward to seeing you all at the beginning of June for LeadDev in London. On that note, thank you all very much, and good evening, good night, good morning, and goodbye.